All right, so we're here. At least three of us are here, and let's charge ahead. So Alan's first here, and with, of course, the only thing on anybody's mind, I think, is the chaos in Washington. Holy cow!
Yes, and I've really been struggling to understand the events of the past few days, like everyone, I think. And I've been struggling to think to understand the support that the president has enjoyed for the past number of years. In particular, the very strong support from the evangelical community. Evangelical voters supported Trump at a historically high level in 2016 and almost at the same level in 2020, despite the fact that Trump, in many ways, in his personal conduct, really does not reflect Christian values, at least as I understand them.
That's an
So I
understatement.
finally,
Yeah.
I, I'm trying to be diplomatic here, after
Not
all.
me. I'm not diplomatic that often. Let me go.
But I finally found a few resources that I think explain it much better, and it made uh, the evangelical supporters' support of Trump clearer to me. And so this article, they invaded the Capitol saying Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president, talks about a number of the supporters at the insurrection who were carrying signs and banners and crosses uh, uh, invoking Trump and Jesus in particular.
Mhm.
And this article, in particular, for me, is interesting because it's written from within the evangelical community. This publication is published by an evangelical organization that has, I guess you could call a more progressive view, political view. And it's mostly just a summary of analyses and opinions of historians and sociologists who are writing from a perspective really within the evangelical community. And that was new to me because a lot of coverage, news coverage up to this point of um, people's religious views and in particular evangelical voters has been from outside of that community, or so I feel. And so this was very insightful to me because it's a very reasoned and sober look at some of the ideological and religious motivations behind it. And there's a study that's referenced in this article that I found particularly interesting, talking about and examining Christian nationalism in America. And this article by Whitehead, Perry, and Baker, it's an academic article. Um, they're sociologists, but it's a quantitative examination of Christian nationalism, and looking at why people support Trump while simultaneously identifying as evangelical Christians. And what they found was that many other previous attempts to explain Trump's political support, be it voters' economic precarity or other ideological views or views on immigration, are all predictive to some degree of people's support of Trump. If anything, their views on Christian nationalism, or what they term Christian nationalism, are in fact one of the strongest predictors of a person's support for Trump, a voter's support for Trump. And I could go on for a while longer on this, but in brief, what it comes down to is that Christian nationalism, as they see it, um, is this constellation of views that includes very strong ethnic antagonism views, which I'll be getting to in my next piece.
Yeah.
And yet it's this constellation of views that has a really particular viewpoint as to what America should be um, as a Christian nation. And so I would just encourage folks to take a look at this article because I think it's as much as there's good qualitative analysis out there, it's the quantitative analysis of people's views using surveys that perhaps is more revealing than anything at this point, and really how much support there is for violent insurrection at this point, because some people feel that there is some kind of religious foundation in that action and that it's justified based on religious views.
Oh yeah, I believe it. And I am, and that's why I wanted to add this one, which is full of good, interesting pictures of what happened. I mean, it was. I thought these were pretty amazing. And they talked about how the people that went in there said they'd never been to the Capitol before. And this is the cops detonating tear gas munitions. Although the people that invaded the Capitol did bring in guns, bombs, twist ties, and they had a noose. So, I mean, clearly they had gone there to lynch people, presumably the vice president and Pelosi. But it was surprising. I mean, one of the many surprising things is that the police just let them in. And the police were completely outnumbered, and calls for more police and a National Guard were completely ignored. And one thing and now the Detroit Police Union has spoken up and said they are going to defend the protesters, and they had every right to do what they did. And I think something that has been absent from a lot of the discussion here is how many of these people are in fact police, the rioters. There's a large force of Trump supporting police. And one thing I hear from them all the time is that, well, Black Lives Matter, smashed some windows on a building, so it's perfectly fine that we do the same. But anyway, I was just, the thing that I hadn't realized sort of until I looked at it again today is that there is essentially no physical protection for senators and Congress people, which they didn't understand. And also, these guys were bringing in Confederate stuff and Nazi stuff. There were people there with T-shirts and banners that said 6 million is not enough because anti-Semitism is big among the Trump supporters. It goes along with the Confederacy. I mean, the people in Charlottesville were chanting about the Jews, and a whole lot of what the Trump supporters are about is hating Soros and blaming the Jews for destroying the world. Everybody always seems to settle on hating the Jews, and every group like this. Anyway, so they invaded the building, and the poor senators and Congress people are just hiding under desks and stuff with like 2 or 3 cops in front of a flimsy door that they're smashing through with just hunks of plastic. It is amazing how there is no protection for the senators and Congress people. I'm not sure I want to continue to serve under these circumstances. And I don't know what they can do, but I think they're going to have to purge the Trump supporters out of the police force of the agency, because if you have traitors on your defenders, I don't know how you can be safe. Anyway, it is a truly amazing time. And I can see why they are so upset. I'm so upset that even some of the Republicans no longer support Trump, although an awful lot of them still do.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Hundreds.
Go ahead.
Over, what was it, 140 people in Congress still.
Well, that fell down to like 110. And in the Senate, 13 fell down to 8. So a lot of them did, in fact, turn against him after they realized that they were directly themselves going to get killed by his supporters. Then they began to rethink their support of him. So, I mean, it's nothing more than rats deserting a sinking ship, but it is a clue that it's sinking. But I think we're in for real chaos. Anyway, I
was surprised that the defense of the Capitol building was so weak. It really makes me wonder if an organized assault force with relatively few people could actually manage to get in and assassinate lawmakers.
They totally could have. In fact, I don't know why they didn't. In fact, the only reason they didn't is because Trump did not go with them and tell them to do that. They were waiting for orders from Trump, and he was sitting in the Oval Office laughing about it on TV and not putting out orders on Twitter. If he had put on Twitter or Parler, okay, now lynch the vice president, they totally could have. And that's what they went there to do. That's why this is the same thing it's been all along. with Trump, he could totally have ended American democracy and made himself a monarch. His supporters would go for it, but he doesn't have the will to do it. I think because he lacks the military skills. He said he was going to walk there with them. He'd walked at the front of them and told them what to do. They would have done anything for him. But he didn't do that.
So, yeah.
Well, I think, that's why I like everyone. I've watched her for 5 years and I can't understand his psychology, but the guy that seems to understand him best is Michael Cohen. And he said the entire thing from the very beginning was nothing but a publicity stunt so he could promote his brand, so he could get more contracts, putting his name on hotels and steaks and hamburger shops and stuff. And that's what it still is. He just wants his name to appear on TV more often so he can license it. Good. I'm glad Kaitlyn did. That I think is because he keeps on doing this. He riles people up to where he could have a coup and destroy the government, and then he doesn't do it and say, wait, what was your goal here? We were like going to overthrow the government, and now what? Now he just wanders off and says, I don't know these people, locked them in jail. Like, wait, stop, what? He said, well, the point was to get my name in the paper. The point was not to like actually take over the government or anything. Anyway, but hopefully we can get him impeached or at least thrown off Twitter, which I think would probably hurt him more. Anyway,
permanently post-election.
No, or at least for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, that would satisfy me. He could get more people killed in the next 2 weeks. After that, probably not.
No.
Anyway, this one I thought was pretty amazing. They have an AI which takes information and then draws the picture. So you say an armchair in the shape of an avocado, and it generates these things. And it even has an interactive thing where you can type in sentences and choose things and it will make them. So here's the same cat on the top as the bottom, called OpenAI. So click to edit. Yeah. So you can choose things like an emoji of a baby penguin. And now you can change things. So if you don't want the penguin wearing a blue hat, you can make it a green hat. And instead of a penguin, you can make it a hedgehog, and on you go. So it's pretty impressive, really. They don't let you write your own entire sentence, but obviously that's a small step ahead. So anyway, AI is really coming along, and natural language processing is really coming along.
That's cool.
That's very impressive.
Yeah. And then, of course, seeing a lot of people mad at Telegram. So
this was a fun read. So they explained how you could use Telegram to pinpoint someone's location. Basically, it's similar to Pokemon Go, where you triangulate a specific area where a Pokemon is, but in this case, it's with people. You can spoof your location to get closer to that person, and then you draw a triangle on the map as you get closer to that person's exact location.
Oh, so it doesn't like publish your address, but you can use it to like track somebody down.
Right. Yes, you can use it to track somebody down because it keeps telling you how far someone is away. So you just keep drawing those map points on the map, and you'll get close enough to be able to identify exactly the person you're looking for.
But maybe I'm on their side. When you enable the feature of showing where you are on a map, haven't you already obviously agreed to that?
Yeah. But it's giving exact location, not instead of saying, within the area, kind of, it's not making it as vague as it should be.
Well, I think this really falls into what that woman was teaching in class a couple of these news sessions ago about ethics in AI. She said, you make some feature, you add this feature to technology, and you should think about how this could be abused. So this idea of locating making yourself visible on the map and leaving that on all the time, they probably should make it so when you turn it on, it only goes for like half hour and then shuts off unless you turn it on again or something. Because I would assume you want people to know where you are because you're out in public, and you don't really want everybody to know where you are forever from now on.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's an interesting issue. I can see why they didn't pay the bug bounty, though. My first thought at the company would be, well, that's what people did. Why would they get upset about that? And you have to think about it.
Yeah.
And I saw an article I think applies here where they said, something people should understand is security is not a technical issue. Security is a human interaction issue, and and technology is just a small component there, which I think is really true. I mean, you have to think about how people use it and what concerns people have, and the technology is just like 10% of the issues.
Right.
Anyway, that's good. Well, it's Ian. So Kaitlyn's here. 0 day.
Yeah, we got a nice new 0 day and PS exec. It's a named pipe hijack. They've already released a micro patch to fix it, but older versions of Windows, if you're not up to date, you have a new PS exec 0 day that you can use to get yourself elevated up to root.
But of course, PS exec, does it have to be installed already?
I mean, you have to somehow get the sysinternals binary on there or something, but
Yeah.
yeah.
But I thought, well, that's right. I didn't look at this. I thought the whole point of PS exec is you can execute something on another machine without it being installed there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have to somehow get it to execute, but yeah, no, there was another bug.
Yeah. So this attacks the machine that is running PS exec, not the target of PS exec.
As far as I know, yeah, it's another PS exec attack, and historically those have been pretty devastating.
So couldn't you just upgrade PS exec itself?
What do you mean upgrade it itself?
To end this?
As far as I mean, it's out. They already have a patch out to fix it.
Oh,
I mean, is that what you're talking about?
So, I mean,
because
yeah, like updating that.
If you had a new version of PS exec, would it still be vulnerable?
no, it would not still be vulnerable. They've already patched it. But if you are running an out of date version of Windows, then you have a vulnerable version of PS exec.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Does anyone know if Mark Russinovich is the only person working on sysinternals, or do they have an internal team that actually is working on
I thought it was him and someone else.
Just two people?
Just the two.
Originally, it was just him, but I
Yeah.
mean, it's been Microsoft product for about 10 years. I would assume they've got the usual code security process happening, but I don't know. But I know Mark is distracted by running Azure these days.
Yeah, exactly. I don't see how he has the time to pay attention to sysinternals anymore.
And I would hope that Microsoft would subject us to their standard software development lifecycle.
Yeah, well, you know, I've heard him give some talks in which he really rags on the Windows team and says some really harsh things, but he's far from immune on such mistakes himself.
Yeah, I thought he was a big fan of Windows. I mean, he knows more about it than almost anybody.
I don't know if that's entirely true. If you listen to him talk about Windows, he clearly has a love-hate relationship with it, and it sounds kind of personal in a way.
Well, I think all security people do get this attitude that people don't fix stuff fast enough and they keep making the same mistake over and over, and they tend to get frustrated.
Yeah, he's definitely at that point.
Well, I know, but I used to be that way. And then I thought about other things like doctors for physical health. They say, you know, if you guys would get some exercise and quit smoking, and I'm so tired of saying this. It's the same old thing. Of course, they keep doing the same stupid thing over and over. We all do. And authority figures can reasonably say, why don't you people stop doing the same stupid thing over and over? Anyway,
What is this word you speak of exercise?
I know. Well,
Never heard of it before.
well, I know. Like I had a friend who smoked, and she said, you know, oh, nobody ever told me this is bad for me. Gee, I had no idea. You know, people do things, they know they're wrong, and they do them anyway. And you can like get all upset about that, or you can sort of get over getting all upset about it. Anyway, this one I thought was amazing. This intellectual academic article, Ethnic Antagonism. Go ahead.
Yeah, ethnic antagonism erodes Republicans' commitment to democracy. Very interesting academic paper here. Again, quantitative rather than qualitative by Larry Bartels. professor at Vanderbilt University. And I should mention that this work was done sometime in 2019. This paper was published in January of 2020, so 1 year ago, before the Black Lives Matters protests and the events of the past year. But Bartels has some really interesting observations about Republicans' views on democracy, and how in the abstract, if you ask questions in the abstract about voting and democratic norms and rights and representation and so forth, Republicans are generally very supportive of those notions. But if you get into specific questions, then that support drops off precipitously. And in his analysis, he sees it as, quote, ethnocentric concerns about growing political power and social influence of immigrants, African Americans, and Latinos. And so, again, it's a rather dense paper here, but this was done as an online survey, an opt-in survey on YouGov. So it's not exactly the best way to perform a survey, but nowadays, since people mostly do not have phones and don't answer phones, or that is to say landlines, there aren't really good ways of conducting surveys. So this is really the best that's available for this kind of survey. And the survey was over 1,000 people, Republicans and Republican-leaning independents. And the survey asked questions like, the traditional American way of life is disappearing so fast that we may have to use force to save it.
Yeah.
And 24% of the respondents strongly agreed with that. 26.7 agreed with it. Only 15 disagreed, and 6.5 strongly disagreed. So, and then there's another question. A time will come when patriotic Americans have to take the law into their own hands. 15 strongly agreed, 26.3 agreed. Only 8.4 strongly disagreed. So I think that you can say what you will about this survey being representative, but this is not good for American democracy. And
well, maybe it is.
Pardon?
Well, maybe it is. You know, I remember I met an immigrant a couple of years ago at one of my conferences. She said, "This is why we moved to America. We're coming here because Americans have this strong, independent attitude. You don't let the government shove you around."
Yeah, well, unless the government is what you actively want to dismantle and use to further your own ideological views, even if that isn't representative of the nation.
It isn't, and but I remember when I grew up, this was very common. My dad believed this stuff. He believed you got to have a gun because you might have to rebel against the government. This is a very common rural attitude in America. The cities see it differently.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that, because they also take, in this survey, they take a look at these views in different locales: rural, small town, suburban, smaller city, big city.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that regardless of locale, it's almost a flat line.
But they're all Republicans, right?
Right.
And there are less Republicans in the cities.
Well, fewer Republicans in cities, but you would expect the Republicans in the cities would be more of the business interested rather than the hardcore social conservative views. So I would have expected really high agreement in rural areas, but much lower agreement in big cities. But apparently that's not the case. It's about the same regardless of where.
Well, I think this is just the American polarization. I think everybody now has pretty much joined one of two camps, and they're pretty much unifying in those camps.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And the old markers of what might influence one's ideological views no longer apply. They also looked at education and correlations between these views and education level. And surprisingly, regardless of respondents having only a high school diploma or having a 4-year degree, they were almost exactly the same level. It
But
declined a little
I think
bit.
it's just the same thing. I mean, the main effect of education is it would cause you to stop being Republican. And if it didn't, then you probably still hold these attitudes.
Yeah, well, that's I hadn't thought about that. It only solidifies one's views, I suppose.
Well, I think when you choose Republicans, you have chosen all these other things. And that's basically what he's showing here. That one word pretty much defines all these attitudes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
I mean, in the past, there were Republicans and they believed in sort of principles. The Trump phenomenon, I think, is nothing to do with this, really. I mean, Trump's not even a Republican. And I thought this is something that I heard. They said people carrying the Trump flag, that's what bothered them. They're not the American flag. They just worship this one guy. They're not even Republicans, really.
mhm.
That's, I think, a very temporary thing, this demagogue stuff.
Yeah, a lot of these hardcore Trump supporters don't strike me as hardcore Republican activists in the first place. Some of them, for sure, have been, but
Well,
a lot of them
in
seem to
Georgia,
be-
there was a lot of talk about this. They said, don't you Republicans imagine that you can get us Trump supporters to vote for just any Republican. We don't really give a damn about your Republican Party. We love Trump.
Mhm.
And it's not the same thing at all.
Yeah. Although at the same time, a number of Republican politicians have made the calculation that this is a durable faction within the Republican Party, and that they need to court these people to improve their own chances, like Ted Cruz and
Yeah, and we're going to see how that goes. I think that's all going to fail because I think Trump has an emotional control over people. They love him because of his TV shows and stuff, and nobody else has that. The only person even close is Tucker Carlson, and I don't think he has that emotional connection. I think that the Republican Party is going to fall apart now that Trump is falling. I do not think there's any way to replace Trump because his whole appeal is this emotional demagogue thing, and none of the rest of them have that. I think, but I don't know.
there's been a lot of prognostications along those lines for the past 4 years, and I don't think the Republican Party is that fragile.
Well, we'll see. It's there's going to be a huge war. It's already happening. When he kicked Pence out, then McCullough, the head of the Senate, McCullough or whatever his name is, McConnell, also turned against Trump. A whole bunch of them are turning against Trump, and now they're going to fight among themselves to take over the party. And we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
I think the most important thing is what Trump does. Does he form a third party or a TV network or something? Or does he like go to prison? I mean, if he remains a significant force, then he will peel all of his followers out of the Republican Party, and that will leave them hopelessly crippled, I think.
Yeah. If Trump Jr. in particular is able to carry the banner forward.
Do you think that's going to happen? I don't think Trump Jr. has any support.
I don't know.
I don't think so.
He doesn't have the magic. I mean, he just seems like a second-rate imitation. I think Tucker Carlson has got more of the emotional appeal. A lot of people really love him.
Yeah.
I think you really have to have a TV show to reach these people. I think if you don't have a TV show, you never connect with them.
Well, I still want to get back to the observation on this article that these are deeply held views within the Republican Party, not necessarily Trump's fringe supporters or newfound supporters, but within the mainstream in the Republican Party, even if people aren't necessarily willing to acknowledge it. And so this may presage more demagoguery, perhaps, or a more hardline reactionary turn within the Republican Party. It'll be interesting to see where this is headed.
But the point here was the racism, right? Where's the racism stuff?
Well, right. Yeah. Then that's a big part of it is the racism.
I don't see it in his data here.
What about
Anti-democratic attitudes, yes, but I thought the point of
Oh.
it was racism.
Right. Well, let me find this here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the questions concern immigrants, for example, and things like, quote, things have changed so much that I often feel like a stranger in my own country.
Oh, okay.
Or that immigrants get more than their fair share of government resources, that people on welfare often have it better than those who work for a living, and that speaking English is essential for being a true American.
Yeah, that's what I expected. Well,
Yeah.
all right. Well, anyway, I guess it helps to have some real scientific stuff here. That all seems like stuff that I think I knew anecdotally.
Yeah. Right. And I think there is a widespread feeling that there's anecdotal evidence, but this for me is the first where you have such strong quantitative data.
And is there any clue what to do about it? That's the really hard one.
Right. Yes. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's anyway. So I thought this was interesting and important. So Biden, apparently the Trump administration has been holding back half the vaccine, so it's there for the second dose, and Biden is going to knock that off.
Bottom line.
Certainly seems like the right move. I mean, obviously, the more people are dying all the time. So getting even one dose out faster would seem like a better move. Anyway, that's what he says he's going to do. Certainly, it's clear that there is, in fact, no government handling the rollout right now. The government is completely asleep at the switch. And so in a couple of weeks, Biden will begin doing something, hopefully an improved rollout. But I don't think we're going to do the crazy stuff Britain is doing, where they give you 2 different versions of the vaccine if you're 2 doses or something like that. They said we aren't going to go for that kind of stuff over here.
Yeah. Have you seen any coverage of why that's a bad idea?
Oh, well, I mean, the point is it was not what was tested. We have phase 3 clinical trials where you give it to a large number of people and prove that it works. And the only thing they had was these specific regimes where the one of them you give them 3 weeks apart, the other one you give you 2 weeks apart. You're departing from this thing that was tested and doing some weird thing that was not tested. I mean, in a world of medicine, this is a no-brainer. You stick to the recommended dosage, because medicine is not linear. I mean, you can't take like 10 aspirin and feel a whole lot better than you would if you only took 2. You can't just say, oh, well, 1 shot of this, 1 shot of that. What's the worst that could happen? Dude, a lot of worse can happen. You have to actually have tests where you test what happens if I give you this one and that one. What happens if I give it to you 3 months later instead of 3 weeks? You can't just say, oh, it'll be fine. At least that's what I think. And that's what I think the American leader in the vaccine says. I mean, I think they're all sort of freaking out in Britain. You would have to test that. And that would be like another 6 months for a giant trial.
Well, my understanding is that in England, they're freaking out so much about this new variant that's so much more transmissible that they've decided that, well, to hell with the evidence and these phase 3 trials, the data from the phase 3 trials, we just need to do something, do anything to slow it down, the spread of this new variant.
You could make that argument, and that's what China and Russia did. They just skipped the phase 3 trials and shipped the stuff, and maybe that's the right move. But in that case, they should have shipped the stuff 6 months ago, like Russia did. I mean, you could do that. I could understand that, saying we're going to abandon phase 3 trials. Phase 1 proves that it doesn't kill you. Phase 2 gives you some evidence that it works, and you could say that's good enough and go. But as almost everything about this, we're limping along without anybody actually making a decision, without any real guidance. So we randomly mix together contradictory strategies and mostly just do nothing.
Yeah, and in defense of the Chinese government's approach, the Sinovac vaccine's apparently 78% effective.
Yeah,
Which is
I mean,
not bad.
yeah, I mean, I might have been content if they said, okay, because of the emergency, we're going to rush it out without doing phase 3 trials. And within the first month or 2, we'll notice that the vaccine kills a lot of people. But the virus is absolutely killing a lot of people. So it is an acceptable decision to rush out a only halfway proven thing. You could justify that. I might have been on board with that, but that's not what we did.
Right.
Anyway, so WhatsApp.
So WhatsApp was basically beaten by Apple's privacy update. If you go further down in the article, they have what like Signal has versus WhatsApp versus iMessage, and just the amount of information that WhatsApp is putting out.
Now, WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, right?
Right. WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, and WhatsApp did update their policies to say, hey, all information captured from WhatsApp will be fed into Facebook.
That's right. And they don't see what's in your chat, but they see the metadata, like who you're talking to and stuff, right?
Right. Right. They have enough data to draw everything else out. So there's been this big push to get out of WhatsApp, but I don't think that's going to happen. Like everybody's just going to leave WhatsApp, because I know that it's pretty embedded in a lot of cultures and whatnot. Like I know Israel uses that a lot. So I don't see everybody going away from it, but there is a surge of people moving to Signal because of this.
Well, you could do that because, I mean, you can't leave Facebook because that's where all the people are. But a one-to-one messaging app, you're really just talking to a few specific people. So you and your buddies could move to like Telegram or something.
Right. So yes, people have been moving to Signal because of this and the policy update.
Now, Signal is Moxie Marlinspike, right?
Signal is that Signal Foundation.
Yeah, so it's really like open source. It's really secure, right? Nobody is actually selling the data to advertisers.
Right. That's the one that Celebrite tried to make news over, saying, "Oh, we figured out how to break it," and Signal said, "No, they don't know how to break it."
Right. What they figured out is, of course, if you get root on the device you're using to write the messages, we can steal the data before it's encrypted.
Right.
Which is like, yes, there's nothing you can do about that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I mean, I hope it is kind of good for awareness. Everybody should know that if you're using WhatsApp, you're just handing your data to Facebook. And if you care about that, you should use Signal. That seems like a good message.
Yep, that is very much a good message.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. And that was, right. Okay, so we're down here. Right, SolarWinds.
Right, so the courts are going back in time, and because of SolarWinds and their concerns over people spying on their documents or getting access to their documents, there are these new rules, and they're pretty draconian about making sure you get everything on paper, and if it's sensitive, it has to be on paper, and you have to turn it in person, except that there's this big loophole here where it says you can do it on a thumb drive as long as you do it in person. There seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding here that if you do it in person, you're not hackable, even if you're handing another person a computer. But
I need an explanation. I mean, medical data has to be on networks to comply with HIPAA.
Right.
And court filings usually become public records. So what are these highly sensitive court documents?
That's a good question. It just says, the most sensitive documents. So under the new procedures announced today.
Detailed explanations.
Yep.
Really? But I thought all that stuff ended up public anyway.
I guess
I guess before a case is over.
Yeah.
Boy, I don't know.
I mean, I imagine there are certain cases that have highly sensitive documents, and if you're working with the police and stuff, there's stuff like that going around.
What I've heard mostly in cases is they actually let criminals get off the hook because they do not want to admit in court what their procedures were, and anything you put in court will become public.
Yeah.
So this is a very strange place to impose like privacy to me.
Right, but so we're going back. So what struck me as being kind of interesting is that for a long time, everyone was sort of pushing for the paperless office. Like, why aren't we there yet? Why aren't we there yet? Why don't we have this paperless office? And this has been going on for decades.
Yeah.
And now we finally are at the point where it's like, okay, yeah, we really need to go back and use paper because these computers can technically be hacked. So.
You know, this reminds me of when I studied for the CISSP, there was a practice test, and the test was you need to send something and you want to make sure it's secret. So do you use email or fax or something else? And the so-called correct answer was that you should use unencrypted email, because if you send a fax, it will just sit on the publicly shared fax machine and somebody might grab it. And I'm like, I'm never going to pass this test.
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah,
possibly.
that's right. That's right. There are questions like that.
I know. I cannot understand their thinking anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but that explains so much about the CISOs I've met.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. And so the defender's view. All right.
Yeah, so this is from the Insect Group at Recorded Future, a threat intelligence firm. And they've published this report, Adversary Infrastructure Report 2020, A Defender's View. And usually I'm a little hesitant to pay much attention to threat intelligence firms after the whole North security debacle. But I think this is interesting because they're actually talking about the command and control structure for APTs and other more sophisticated actors out there, which you don't usually get in the reports from the big blockbuster reports from the major security firms. They will talk about indicators of compromise, and they'll talk about components of the command and control structure, but they won't give a good view of where those C2s are located and the infrastructure therein. So this report takes a look at the C2s that the Insect Group has identified, and it breaks it down by things such as what kind of software is being used, what kind of rats are being used in the C2 infrastructure. And they find there's a lot of Cobalt Strike and Metasploit being used. And they also look at the ASs that are associated, the hosting providers that are associated with the C2s. And they find that Amazon is number one with 471 C2s that they've identified, followed by DigitalOcean at 421 C2s. And then the list goes on from there, some well-known, some not at all well-known, at least to me. And this was really surprising to me because I would have assumed that these APTs or these threat actors would be avoiding these big name providers like AWS because it's just too visible. I would have assumed that they would either go with really obscure, possibly shady VPS providers that accept payment only in Bitcoin, or that they were hacking forgotten servers at universities or at small businesses and just using that for their C2 infrastructure. But it turns out, according to Insect Group at least, that this part of the threat actors' infrastructure is far more visible, and it's being used on these very public platforms. So this was
I'm not surprised by that. I mean, because otherwise you'd get caught because you'd look suspicious. You totally want to put it on like a popular place.
I guess so. Yeah, but you'd think at the same time that these popular places would themselves be able to identify the malicious activity better themselves, so they wouldn't allow it in the first place.
Well, I don't think they can see what you're doing at all these days. Everybody uses encrypted channels and stuff.
They sometimes can see. I know when we've launched competitions like the night before, my team may accidentally leave a service on for a little too long, and we'll start getting hits from bots and whatnot, and DigitalOcean will report it to us.
Yeah, so if you run if you run vulnerable stuff and you get hacked, then they'll shut you down because you get like a crypto miner or something. But a C2 center, I don't think they could possibly detect that. I mean, from their point of view, you're just running some kind of server and a bunch of people are connecting to it, sending up data. How could they know you're running a C2 center?
Well, Yeah, I guess I just assumed that some people are smarter and are watching more carefully than is actually the case. Now, one thing I should say about this survey from INSIC Group is that they don't really go into their methodology. And there's only the briefest little mention of this in their paper that suggests that they're performing scans. The nature of these scans, we don't know. I mean, for all we know, it could just be Nmap scans that are looking at particular ports that are used by Metasploit, so something as primitive as that. And so this may not actually be a representative sample of the C2s that are being used in the world.
Using proactive scanning.
Yeah, proactive scanning.
Yeah. Well, that would suggest that if the hosting providers would use whatever they're using, they could detect these things.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's interesting.
And another thing that they also acknowledge in this report is that some of this infrastructure probably belongs to pen testing firms.
Oh, there's that. Yes.
Yeah. So this is not necessarily all malicious.
Oh.
Some of it might be on the up and up.
Okay.
And Cobalt Strike, I understand that that is used by APTs, but it's certainly also used by pen testing firms.
Yeah. It's these are good points. I've seen a lot of good stuff from Recorded Future. I think they got a good reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, then this one here is actually quite similar. Gray's Noise just brought this out. Rule it out. And what this is they take a bunch of sources and they find innocent IP addresses. So you can just take this stuff out of your logs. Doesn't necessarily mean you can trust all the traffic from these places, but these are places that are probably not malicious. They have a list of various reasons why something would not be considered evil. Like this domain has been around for a while, it's known legitimate and all that jazz. So they say you can use it to clean out your logs. And that does seem like a good idea. It reminds me of in forensics, they have this well-known database of like normal innocent files. So just do an MD5 hash and anything on this list you recognize. And I know F-Secure Antivirus does that too. It blocks any new software that's not on the known good list. So that might be a way to improve things. Although I would think if you just put your stuff on an ephemeral Amazon IP, you might pass this test. But anyway.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. But they might detect that the domain is new. That's a trick that I think Cisco Umbrella uses. A lot of people use. If this domain has not been around for like more than a couple of weeks, then we won't let you connect to it because it's probably evil.
Well, speaking of identifying based on addresses, one other important point in this INSIC Group report is that these C2s remain active for over 50 days on average.
Yeah.
Which is a lot longer than I would have expected, once again.
Yeah, they used to use like round robin DNS and move it like every hour or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's surprising. What it kind of suggests is a lot of people must be using like hard-coded C2 addresses too.
Yeah, right. And it's taking defenders a very long time to catch on.
Yeah. Well, it suggests that there might be employment for our students. You don't need to be a super genius
Yes.
to help people. Okay, so what's going on with Wi-Fi 6? Like, what the heck is Wi-Fi 6 anyway?
So these two articles, in my mind, they're together. Wi-Fi 6 is starting to get certified. It's starting to roll out into devices. So that means it's going to be time to start shopping for new phones, new laptops, all that with Wi-Fi 6.
6
But,
gigahertz. How
the
fast
devices,
is it?
yeah, the devices themselves won't be out until later this year. And that's where the second article comes into play, where, for example, the GPUs, they're going up again. So if you were thinking about buying a GPU, it's probably not a good time to buy one. You probably want to wait until either the end of this year or next, when the prices will start dropping, because the prices are going up now because of tariffs.
Because they're from China, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, all you have to do is wait 2 weeks, and I think all those Chinese tariffs are going away.
So for Wi-Fi 6, I think Wi-Fi 6 has been out for a little bit now. What's different is it's Wi-Fi 6E, And the big difference there is that they're opening up a new part of the spectrum, 6 gigahertz band, 6 gigahertz frequency to transmit on. And I think we talked about this before. That it's the problem with, of course, 2.4 is that it's an open. So the old, sorry, let me back up for people that don't know much about Wi-Fi frequency. So the old frequency for Wi-Fi was 2.4 gigahertz, and that is sort of an open frequency that anyone can broadcast on. There's a lot of noise, and the reason why it's open is because that's also the frequency that microwaves use to heat up your food. So we're using that to broadcast our Wi-Fi signals, and everyone knows if you turn on the microwave and you have your Wi-Fi on, it would mess up. So we decided to move to 5 gigahertz because it would be a dedicated Wi-Fi frequency. Now the problem with 5 gigahertz is that is in the frequency that we use for radar. And so by default, all Wi-Fi routers have this like shut off switch that if it detects that there's some sort of radar going on, it means that the US military is active or some military is active, and your Wi-Fi has to cut out immediately. and
So can you make a gadget that puts out that signal and nukes it?
You mean for
a DOS attack? Could you
yeah, one would assume so, and that would be
awesome.
Yeah. And then so because of so there is some problems with 5 gigahertz. It's rarely a problem, but it is still a problem. So 6 gigahertz is going to be dedicated Wi-Fi frequency that's not going to conflict with anything else. It'll just be Wi-Fi forever, and it'll technically be a little faster because as you go higher in frequency, you can send more data. Technically, I mean, there's just more phases to modulate if the higher frequency you go, but yeah, that's what's going on. It's the 6 gigahertz being rolled out.
And it's not being shared with other popular services?
Nope.
Oh, well, that would be nice.
Right. So yeah, if prices keep going up, just wait. Just wait it out, because you'll probably want to buy something that can do both, Wi-Fi 6E and have whatever latest hardware together.
Yeah.
What about the GPUs going up in prices? I've heard that the electronics companies are already shifting production to Taiwan and Philippines to avoid those tariffs.
Are those tariffs locked in? I would assume that Biden will probably just cancel, and that was just Trump's nuttiness, I think.
I think Biden's got more pressing issues for the first couple of months.
Yeah.
Well, I think he'll have some kind of commerce secretary, though. And this is actually, I think, a pretty big issue. The trade war with China. I think that'll be high on the agenda for the economic arm. Anyway, I guess we're going to find out. And integrated quantum communication. Okay, what is this?
I don't know. That's the thing. I still have no idea how all these quantum computers and quantum communications work. But from what I can tell, and this is coming from China, so there might be some, government propaganda going on in this article, but supposedly these researchers have created a quantum computer network used for quantum encryption.
Well, I know what that is.
Yeah, it's a quantum key. So the idea is that it's an optical computer network. So it's using fiber optics to send quantumly encrypted data between, I would assume, either regular computers or other quantum computers.
No. No, I know what this is.
Okay. Tell us.
All this is, if you do public key encryption, you have this, you do something like Diffie-Hellman, where you trade these numbers over this network to agree on a key. And that's not perfectly secure because you could mathematically crack it. Quantum key distribution is where you send the key with single photons that can only be measured once. So if somebody intercepted and read it, because it would destroy the message. So you can send a key from one node to the other with 100% confidence that nobody made an extra copy of that key. That's all it does. It distributes a secret key. So it basically accomplishes the same thing as RSA, but it's based on physics instead of mathematics. And most people do consider it more secure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining. I wasn't quite sure how this was supposed to work. But they do have one set up, supposedly in China, for sending sending data over light. And
they've sent it 2,000 kilometers. You could buy these commercially, although they're rare, but the limit used to be like 100 kilometers. So they've got it working better. Of course, now this might be important because people are worried that quantum computers will crack RSA. And if they did, switching to quantum key distribution would be one way to dodge that. But anyway, it's I'm surprised they're doing it, but they are correct that this should be more secure. It does have flaws though. One of the flaws with quantum key distribution is a lot of the early systems had automatic gain control. So you could turn up the brightness and it would not notice. And if you turn up the brightness, it's now sending like 100 photons at a time. It's not quantum anymore, and now you can intercept it. So there are there are also sideband attacks. Nothing is ever perfect. But the fundamental key distribution is difficult to hack. Anyway, oh, that's cool. But there's another kind of quantum communication network I've heard talk about, which is what I thought this might be, where you're actually using like quantum teleportation to send the data or something. And that would be awesome. But that's nowhere near ready for production.
Yeah, no. This is all using optical cables, according to the article.
And it's just using quantum key distribution, which has a technology that has been around for a couple of decades.
Okay,
They've just improved it. But they're probably right that is the most secure way to do it. Anyway, I guess that's it. Any more remarks? Well, hopefully we'll have less exciting news next week. We won't have any more revolutions or anything. Anyway, I would stop this. There it is.